Okay, so once again, thank you for joining. My guest today here is Hannah. Hannah is environmental activist and work mostly with Leicester Friends of the Earth. In a minute, Hannah will have a minute or two to give us a brief background of what has been happening of late. But I know Hannah is a very good activist, environmental activist, and keen about issues on environmental sustainability, climate change mitigation, and making attempts to hold some organizations, corporate organizations, responsible for either sponsoring or participating in one way or the other with some other organizations who tend to not to give too much attention to environmental situation around the UK. So Anna, thank you so much for joining in this conversation. So I'll give, let's start with knowing you. Audience will want to know who you are, what you do, and we'll take it over from there.
Oh, thank you for inviting me, Justin. So my main role in regards to environmental activism is that I'm the coordinator of Leicester Friends of the Earth. And Leicester Friends of the Earth is a grassroots campaigning group. So we take action on a range of environmental issues. That includes climate change, renewable energy, sustainable transport, protecting biodiversity, and sort of anything related to those. But in addition to that, I'm also a brownie leader. So I help to run a brownie group for 7 to 10-year-old girls. And I always consider that to be part of my environmental work because we take girls outside as much as we can. And we place a lot of emphasis on spending time in nature and learning about nature, which I think is really important to develop a connection to the natural world, especially when we're younger.
Okay.
And then, as well as that, I'm also involved in Evington Community Orchards project. So I help look after local apple trees and plant more trees. And I'm very interested in growing food locally. I have my own allotment, so I do some gardening for myself. And then I'm an active member of Leicester Green Party as well. So I was on the committee previously, and now I just help out with actions, so delivering leaflets and knocking on doors and that kind of thing.
Okay, quite a lot of interesting things going on around around all of that. Green Party, Leicester Friends of the Earth, working with the girls and all around. I think if you link, if you see, there will be linked all around there. That's really shows that you are concerned about the environment. Well, let me quickly ask you, what's the passion? What do you derive as an individual, from, all of these activities? What sense of fulfillment? What's the driving force?
That's a difficult question, isn't it? So I've been interested in environmental issues for as long as I can remember, since I was little myself. I had a really great teacher at primary school called Mrs. Martin, who I still know actually. She belongs to my choir now. And she used to run a nature club, and she used to take us outside to, look in the pond and fish around and see what we could find. But she also used to talk to us about environmental issues a little bit, I think, and I think that's a lot of where my interest came from, was in listening to her. But then for me, it's also just about fairness. Climate change for me, the most infuriating thing about it is the unfairness of it and the fact that the people who are causing the problem are not the people at the moment having to deal with the consequences. So I think my motivation there is just that I can't live with that unfairness without trying to do something about
That's very, very interesting. So it means that you were inspired, first of all, by your primary school teacher, Mrs. Martin, you said, and it linked up from there. So you think that catch them young kind of inspiration is a vital tool, right?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, there are very logical reasons, aren't there, that we need to tackle climate change, and people can come to it in that way, and just for purely sort of logical reasons. But I think if you have a connection to the natural world when you're younger, that helps to guide you for the rest of your life then, because you just, the idea of watching the environment being destroyed, then that is personally painful, if you feel some connection to nature. So I do think it's useful if children develop that. You develop it when you're younger. You can develop it when you're older, of course, people do. But it's just, if we grow up sort of connected to nature, then you do naturally develop it when you're young.
That's right. That's right. Very interesting. Okay. Thank you for providing that insight. Well, for me, I didn't grow up, I didn't learn about environmental issues from the beginning. It was halfway in the middle age of my life, I would say, that I discovered, oh, I think we need to. But I've been like being very close to nature when I was a boy. I used to nurse animals, get to the jungle, get some birds, put them in cages, and play with some rodents, nurse them, even had to feed them, sometimes. Sometimes I will get those ones that there are some hit and run animals that were initially nursing their babies, and then because due to maybe hunting or any accidents, their parents get killed, and we take those ones home and begin to nurture them in the way of grooming and spoon feeding them until when they grow. So I was just doing that innocently, not knowing that it's part of conservation.
That's very cool.
Yeah, right. Okay, so yeah, let's talk about your experiences around communities engagement when you've been engaging with communities and, of course, getting feedback from them, from different communities within Leicester, within Evington where you live, or other place. So how has it been like, communicating these issues to people who are, one, less concerned, two, not aware, three, aware, concerned, but doesn't know how to go about it?
Yeah, I think so. I've been involved in Leicester Friends there since 2009. And before that, I had some involvement in environmental activism at university as well. So, 15 years or so maybe. And I think in that time it has changed. I think people's responses have changed when you talk to them about environmental issues. It used to be that we had to start by convincing people that climate change was a problem and that it was happening and we needed to do something about it. But I think more recently, in the last few years, we don't have to start there because people know that it's a problem. We're seeing it much more, aren't we? So people are seeing the extreme weather on the news. We're talking about it much more. So I think there is much more awareness now, which is good. So that's a good place to start. I think the reaction now is interesting, isn't it? A lot of people understand that it's a problem and that it's a big problem and we need to do something about it, but they feel overwhelmed by it and afraid as well, I think. And then it can be difficult then for people to take action if they just feel too overwhelmed and too powerless. So I think as activists, a lot of our role now is to show people that there is still time to do something about it, that we can still stop it getting out of control, and that there are things we can do as individuals. Bless you. So that we can, as individuals, we can talk to our politicians and governments, and we can try to ask them to do more, and that there are things we can do in our own lives as well while we're waiting for politicians to take the lead.
All right. That's fine. Times have changed and things have also changed. Like you rightly said, the issue of climate change is no longer when people are not aware. I think the impact is rather so obvious this time around that anybody can see it, that can feel it in a way. So the doubt has been reduced a little bit or maybe significantly, that we don't need to. Okay, that's fine. So level of awareness now is a little bit reduced. So it's more of taking action this time around. And that collective action is what is required at this point. So what are those indicative activities that you might tend actionable at local community level? What do they, I know from the beginning you mentioned tree planting and some others that you might want to share from your experience.
I think there are all sorts of ways to take action on climate change, aren't there? Everybody can find a way to take action that they're comfortable with. There's all sorts of different ways of getting involved. The most important thing I think we need is political change. We need our leaders to lead on this. We need them to take action because governments have much more power to make a difference than we do as individuals. So I think perhaps the biggest thing that we can all do is to be lobbying our politicians, writing to MPs, phoning them, talking to them, going on protests, that kind of thing. I think it's really important that we show politicians how important this is to us, and that we persuade them to make changes, big changes. But for people who are less keen on the lobbying and they don't want to spend all their time on that, I think practical action as well is really useful. So, like I said, I'm involved in the community orchard project here in Evanston, and that is just really fulfilling to go out and plant trees, see them growing, and then collect your apples. That's a really amazing thing to do. And there are lots of tree planting projects. There's lots of community gardening projects happening across Leicester now, which is really exciting to see. So people can get involved in practical projects like that. And then there is even more local things you can do. You can do wildlife planting in your own garden if you want to start there. So I think there's something for everybody, really.
Okay. Yeah, I like the wildlife planting and garden thing. I think I have a small garden I'm trying to grow this time around. It's still very young, and I tried to get birds to come in, so I put in bird feeds strategically so they could come around, and children like playing with them when they see them as well. Honestly speaking, right, there's just nothing as having that nature, around where you live, and at maybe national scale, that nature is at the heart of whatever we do, isn't it? That would be very good. Okay, that's interesting. So I'm also aware that sometimes you make attempts to hold, or if not holding them accountable, but making them aware. I'm talking about corporate organizations like banks and other organizations that fund fracking. So what has been the reaction from corporate organizations towards this community response to climate mitigation or awareness generally?
Yeah, it's an interesting question, isn't it? So in terms of the banks and the things that they fund, we have done quite a bit of work trying to raise awareness of that. At one point, one of my colleagues said to me that we seem to be spending every weekend outside Barclays in Leicester because we were just having so many stalls there. And they started hiring security guards every time we were going to turn up, which was quite funny. Because there were only a small number of us, we weren't that scary. But yes, we do try to raise awareness of what corporations are doing, so that people have a choice. I think so many people they open a bank account, they don't think about it really about what their money is being invested in. But actually, if we all thought about it and looked at it, we could make a big difference. We could all move our money away from these corporations that are doing things we don't agree with, and it does have an impact eventually. So I know there was a big campaign back in the 80s with Barclays, for example, because they were supporting apartheid in South Africa, and there was a big campaign to take money out of Barclays, and it made an impact. They changed their policy in the end. So this kind of campaigning can work, and we do what we can there. Barclays, they have responded nationally and said that they would move their money, but then they've taken a long time to do it in the way that corporations do. And I think they've been hoping perhaps that we would stop paying attention and forget about it. But yes, I noticed the other day I was watching telly and there was an advert break in a film, and during the advert break there were two different adverts for laundry soap, and both of them mentioned the environment, which I thought was really interesting, because I think so big companies like that are very good at market research. They will know what their customers care about.
Yep.
And it's a good sign actually if they think that their customers care about the environment and they need to be taking some action. But we do need to we need to maintain a healthy skepticism about what they say they are doing and how useful that is. So I noticed one of these companies, they said they were I can't remember, the advert was quite emotional in the way that adverts normally are, and they said that they were completely changing, and then they got a little bit of small print at the bottom and it said bottle was 50% recycled plastic. And I thought, well, 50%, okay, that's something, but how about completely recycled plastic or refillable bottle? It's just they've started using the environment and environmental issues as a marketing ploy, and we've got to be quite skeptical about how much they're actually doing, whether what they're doing is actually useful or whether they're just trying to trick us with
exactly. That's the point. Attitude. Something I did with my students 2 sessions ago was a small experiment to demonstrate attitude and behavior gap to find out if actually what they say is what they do.
Yeah.
And in the end, we have two sticker sheets all separated from each other, and very few at the middle, showing that very few people actually are doing what they say and what they know. Most people know it, but they are doing something very different.
Yeah.
And I think that's a trick. I think all of us that are genuinely concerned will need to now begin to understand and go behind the ads, right? To actually know what they are doing in practice and dealing with this, because it's easier to know that the people are aware. So let's give them this information. Let's spend all our bosses green, but then we're burning.
Exactly. I think that's exactly it, isn't it? It's trying to look at what they're actually doing, not just what they, what color the bus is. Exactly. And that's a really good example. I listened to your podcast that you did with Mel as well, Mel Gould, who's also a member of Leicester 20th, and she was talking about carbon literacy training and the importance of people understanding that. And I think it's probably true. Everybody needs that, don't they? We all need carbon literacy training so that when we see these adverts on the telly, we can decipher, is that actually useful, or are they just using this as a marketing ploy to sell this to?
Absolutely fine. I agree with you. Absolutely. Everyone needs to be carbon literate. And I think recently I decided, okay, because it's one of because in Nottingham Trent University, we are prime champions, and then carbon literacy training is embedded in some of the programs we do, offering that to staff and inviting the local community to participate. I decided that, look, I need to take this outside this outside Nottingham or outside the university, and begin to engage African communities as well independently. And look, we need to be aware of this and how we behave even at home. Because in my house, for instance, where I live, I know how much my fridge will consume per year. I know how much energy, I know how much gas will go in. So by end of the year, I have the statistics I could calculate to know my carbon footprint for the whole year. And then we could decide what local actions in the house we can take to further drive this down.
Yeah.
So if I drive this down by, let's say, 10%, and the entire place where I live, we're able to reduce that by 10% each, it makes sense when it gets to the overall gross calculation, isn't it? So that's all right. Yeah, carbon literacy, very good. Thank you for bringing that, and thank you for listening to our conversation with Mel as well. And that is the same way we intend to pass the message, and other people to will participate and share in the fantastic things you have been doing going forward. Okay, the politicians you mentioned, I noticed now that most county councils and city councils are beginning to appoint specialists, climate specialists, and leaders in climate change and different ways. And then these are the people they front to engage with local communities, local actions. So how has that relationship been? Because sometimes I'll discover that it used to be something either they disagree or they agree, but now with some specialists in between, how are you managing and communicating with the city councils?
Yeah, we have a good relationship with the city council actually. So they have just appointed I think she's been in post for a little while, but she's just moved to Leicester. They've appointed a climate change manager, and they already had a sustainability team in Leicester, which I think is 3 or 4 people. And they've also got an eco schools team. So they've got about 4 people who work with schools to look at sustainability. So the city council, I think, are doing a lot on climate change. They're doing more than a lot of local authorities, and they are really trying. So they've got a climate action plan in Leicester, and it is quite ambitious. We've got some ideas about things that we think they need to add. We've been talking to them about that, but they're very receptive to feedback, and they do talk to us. So we do have a good relationship with the city council. I think the biggest difficulty for them is that they are hampered all the time by national government policy, and lack of support, to be honest. So I think, at a local level, there is political will to act on climate change and to act on biodiversity. But at a national level, I'm less convinced. Well, I'm convinced that there is not enough political will to act on these things. And it's very frustrating, I think, for us as activists, and I'm sure for the city council as well, that they're constantly having to sort of fight for the resources that they need to do these things. But yeah, at a national level, you hear our government say things like they want to be leaders on climate change, and yet they're trying to open a new oil field and a new coal mine. And I sort of despair when I read the news about that. I just think this is just so much rubbish. You're saying one thing and you're doing something
doing the completely opposite.
Yeah, it's so unhelpful, isn't it? And this year as well, the UK is hosting the International Climate Talks in Glasgow. And they're still doing this. They're still trying to open a coal mine. I just think, well, what are you doing? So yeah, at a national level, it's quite a different picture.
So what would you advise if you were to, of course, you have MPs around coming from all the local communities going to the national to have these conversations, and if there are agitations, for various communities, like you said from the beginning, writing to MPs, holding meetings with them and letting them know how we feel about this, we expect that should generally trickle upward this time around and form a national conversation that is cohesive and carries everyone's thoughts along. So what do you expect them to do at national level that disconnects? How can we measure up and ensure that they really feel, because there have been protests, Extinction Rebellion, for instance, have protested and are still protesting and blocking streets and making sure this knowledge get directly to the MPs. So what's in your opinion you think is actually the reason why they say A and they are doing anti-A?
Yeah, good question. And I mean, I think you could spend a whole podcast just talking about that, couldn't you? And you still wouldn't get to the bottom of it. Fundamentally, I think we need to elect different people in the UK. We are electing the wrong MPs. but we can't solve that overnight. We have to wait for elections. And even then, we're still, it's still not, because of our electoral system and the way that it works, we don't get the people that we vote for anyway half the time. It's not very representative. But in the meantime, with the MPs that we have got, we just have to, I think, keep showing them how much everybody cares about this and make it important to them, and show them that it is an issue that people in their constituency, their local people that they're accountable to, show them that it's important to them. So yeah, I think that's all we can do, isn't it, to keep lobbying. Sometimes people are afraid to go and talk to their MP. They think they have to be an expert on an issue to go and speak to their MP, and they might be nervous about doing that. But I have to say, when I've been to speak to my MP a few times now, they're not experts. They can't be experts in everything, because there's too many things for them to keep track of. So actually, if you read a little bit about the issue that you're interested in and then go and talk to your MP, you'll probably find that you're telling them things they don't know. You don't have to be an expert to go and talk to them. And actually, they don't get that many people who go to talk to them about issues. They'll have a lot of people coming to their surgery who need help with something, who need help with, like an immigration claim, for example, or healthcare issues or things like that. They'll have a lot of people asking them for personal help, but they won't have that many people going to their surgery and asking them to do something on a particular issue. So if they get a couple of people doing that, especially if you're doing it regularly, they will pay attention to that. They will notice. So I think my advice there would just be, don't be nervous, just go and do it. They're just people, and we just need to keep talking to them about these issues.
Okay, that's a very good advice, and it's very direct. Whoever is going to listen to this will understand that MPs probably don't know everything, because environmental issues are there, health and safety issues are there, infrastructure, so many things around them. And sometimes they are human beings too. They need to be reminded about the priority of these. And I think now people said that the climate change situation is a crisis, and it needs to be treated as such. So how much do you agree with the people who say that climate change is a crisis?
It is a crisis. We're sleepwalking into it, I think, because it's not as fast, for example, as the coronavirus crisis. It's not happening like within 2 weeks. And so we were much better at dealing with that. And that was really interesting, I think, for activists to watch what happened with coronavirus, because we saw that the government actually, if they are facing a crisis and they recognise it as a crisis, they made big changes overnight. They brought in things like the furlough scheme and lockdown. And that was really interesting to watch, because it was like, this is what it looks like when they actually recognise an emergency.
Yeah.
Because what they're doing on climate change, it doesn't compare, does it? They're not reacting in the same way. But it is a crisis. The sort of extreme weather that people are dealing with. So I was reading the other day about the heat waves in Greece and the wildfires there.
Mm-hmm.
All of that is going to get a lot worse if we don't act on this. And scientists have been saying how little time we have left actually to deal with it. I think the UN report was saying 4 years, wasn't it? 4 years to peak emissions. We've got to start rapidly reducing them. Otherwise, if you read what the predictions are of what would happen with runaway climate change, it's very difficult even to read about it. It doesn't bear thinking about. We can't survive that. So we need to act on this now.
Yeah, you are right, especially for predictions. I think for the past, I would say about maybe 10 years, the predictions have underestimated climate change impacts generally.
Yeah.
Because each year, the impacts, the heat waves, they supersede predictions, and that has been happening consistently for the past 6 years now, in a row. So in terms of predictions, I, as a person, I've read about climate change and I've studied a section of it a little bit more deeper. And sometimes I get scared not to make people paranoid to see, what I have seen. So I discuss this maybe with some people and experts and say, look, if we don't take action, what is going to happen with respect to these impacts will be far, far more catastrophic. And these things are happening, the wildfires things, not too long ago, just back here in mainland Europe, what happened in Germany, and then if you compare that to a small island like the UK, anything can happen. And then before you know it, different places will be submerged, and you know how that will be. So it's a reason why we need local action. And these actions necessarily must not be where we have discovered indicators. I think people just need to get out there and look for vulnerabilities and begin to build adaptive capacities in a way from the front line, while other people are also mitigating. So it needs to be an all-round struggle, isn't it, to ensure that people are aware and people know when it becomes dangerous to evacuate. People know when it becomes reasonable, to not to consume certain things, which is fine. Okay, that's right. Thank you for that. And then I think it will be interesting going forward. I will share this in particular with people and say, okay, we need to talk more, and we need to also do more. I think possibly between talking and doing, which one will you prioritize?
I would prioritize doing. I think that keep talking. We need to get on and do some stuff. But the way that activists get things done actually is to talk to politicians, isn't it? So the talking is part of the doing.
Yeah, talking is part of doing, isn't it? Talking is also part of doing. So I was going to ask something quickly before I get to the next point. Do you think, for economic reason, because government usually also want to look at economic reasons and look at overall GDP of the country and certain indicators they could use, or investment they want to allow, to boost GDP, and that could be investing in coal mining or investing in other fossil enabling activities. So do you think that could be one of the reasons why government sometimes would need to be like, I think we know it has environmental impacts, but then it's also going to create certain number of jobs, in the UK, and keep people working instead of. So what do you think about putting Boris Johnson in that kind of situation?
Yeah, I think that is a lot of problem, isn't it? In that's why we're still going down these routes. But we need to change then the economy, don't we? We need to change the way the economy is working, because if the economy is still sort of giving the advantage to fossil fuels, that's not good, is it? It's not going to work in the long term. So there have been talks, haven't there? I'm not an expert on this, so I won't talk about it very much, but there have been talks about carbon pricing and setting a price on carbon. And if we did that, then hopefully that would have an impact on the way that the economy works, so that we would start prioritising clean energy instead of these dirty fuels that we keep pursuing, even though we know they're causing this enormous amount of damage. But in the UK, I'm not going to excuse Boris Johnson on that account, because I think we could still do better. For example, if we had more support for renewable energy, that would create jobs. Actually, there's lots of studies that have shown that that clean energy will create jobs, and it's similar jobs even to the jobs that we have in the fossil fuel industry. It's engineering sort of jobs. So those same people could be helped, reskilled, and trained to go and work in renewables instead. It's probably a lot nicer for them. I mean, I don't think most of us would want to work in a coal mine anyway. Mm-hmm. It's going to be much nicer, isn't it, to be outside and building wind turbines? That's a much better job. So yeah, I think we need to be reviewing what we prioritise in terms of where the financial support goes.
Yeah, no, very right about that. Isn't it? Need to really think carefully around it, because investing in sustainable opportunities or sustainable systems creates sustainable opportunities that people need to, isn't it? So it's just a matter of now thinking it through properly and seeing how you get people to rather walk around green options. Yeah. And there are a lot of innovations coming up now. Of course, some of this, the challenge where people want to are posing and really finding it difficult to adapt is the issue of the costs that comes with it. At the beginning, we know that when we do the calculations, in the long run, it will pay, but the cost that comes at the beginning, for example, if I want to install solar panels in around my house, right? The cost at the beginning is going to be, and the payback period takes so many years, isn't it? To do, and the investment from the beginning, companies that are building this want their own payback period. They want their money back quickly, right? But we as consumers, we look at it in the longer run before we start reaping the benefits, and then the money to make that investment immediately is not there. That's one for solar panel. If you look at buying an electric car, for instance, you know how much Tesla will want to sell that to anybody in the UK. So this, how do we balance these costs benefits effects as a community, especially from community level?
Well, I think the cost of not doing these things, the cost of dealing with runaway climate change, you can't even put a price on that, because it would be catastrophic. So that's my first point, that we need to do it, because otherwise we won't be able to cope with the consequences of not doing it. But also there can be government incentives for all of these things, can't they? We used to have a feed-in tariff, for example, for solar panels, and that made the payback period much shorter, because people would earn a certain amount of money for each unit of electricity that was generated from their solar panels. And that's what they've had in Germany as well. That's one of the ways I think that they have encouraged there's a German word, isn't there, that they use for it, but their energy revolution that they've had in Germany with renewable energy and decentralized renewable energy as well. They've used feed-in tariffs to help people install that kind of technology on their houses. So there are ways that governments can incentivize all of these things. I think there's a grant, isn't there, for electric cars, or has that gone now? There used to be. And there needs to be more of that kind of support that help people make good choices, so that we are developing a more resilient and more sustainable society.
All right. Yeah, that's fine. I think the point that government need to incentivize these systems will be very important. And apart from, even corporate organizations need to do it, isn't it? Including those building these electric cars and those building these solar panels. I need to also understand that there is a compelling moral reason why we are doing this, not necessarily profit driven, but then for moral reason, we need to look for ways in which we can incentivize and rather make this go out to the community more than making the profit. Isn't, of course, the what we call triple bottom line approach now, people, profits, and the planet need to be at the heart of these corporate organizations in a way that it will help. I know the NHS is doing something about something like that. Maybe there's the way they subsidize or negotiate and encourage NHS workers to take hybrid and electric cars if they want to. And that is really helpful. Okay. That's all right. Thank you for shedding lights on that. So let's now look at what is happening very soon, COP26, the Glasgow conference. So how are you preparing for that? What's the preparation?
Yeah, in Leicester. So we're just starting to kind of plan our campaign around that in Leicester. And I think that's probably going to be our focus for the rest of this year with Leicester Friends of the Earth. So we're starting in September. And our focus is to to build a message from Leicester to the world leaders in Glasgow to show them that we're asking them to take action on climate change, that people care about this. And I think a lot, this is happening in a lot of other places as well. So the hope is the Climate Coalition, which are helping to coordinate this campaign. The hope is that we will build a massive message from all different places to show world leaders that we are asking for action on climate change. So we've been working with the City Council actually. They are leading a Green Hearts from Leicester initiative where they're asking people to make a pledge of something that they want to do in their own lives to take action on climate change. And we're going to share those on social media so that we can show the people going to the talks, this is what we're doing. Now, what are you going to do? We need you to take action as well. And the other thing we're going to do is we did this before in 2015 actually for the Paris talks as well. We're going to collect pictures of people using a photo frame so that we can create a sort of like a photo petition so that we can share that and say, here's a picture of all the people in Leicester who want action on climate change. And we're in the process of making a photo frame. I think our slogan this time is going to be Leicester has its eyes on Glasgow or something like that. And we've got a big eyeball for the photo frame. So
that's going to be a giant maybe poster, or you want to design it, and it should be. So is there action to take some people because usually from the COP21, I think the Paris one, we had some people, Friends of the Earth and different Green Party, Greenpeace, and all of them staging different protests or holding some placards within the venue. So are you planning to move some people to Glasgow?
That's a good question. And I think it's not very clear at the moment whether it's going to be a good idea or not to do that. So there is a sort of a fringe conference, if you like, which is being planned for activists alongside the UN conference, which will be activists coming together and saying, how do we work together to put pressure on politicians to get action on climate change? And the original plan was that would happen in Glasgow, but because of coronavirus and we're not certain about the rates of infection and whether it's going to be safe for everybody to travel, there's some discussion now about whether that's going to be a hybrid event, or some of it will be online and some of it will be in person in Glasgow. Yeah, so I've booked 3 days off work when I could go to Glasgow, but I'm going to wait and see. I haven't booked train tickets or anything. I'm waiting to see what the coronavirus situation is. I don't want to, if it looks like it would be dangerous to travel, I don't want to do that and then bring infection back here. So, yeah.
Okay, yeah, I think that's a very good thinking to ensure that you pay attention to what happens from the coronavirus thing before people travel. I think everyone coming to Glasgow will pay attention to that, and people are receiving the jab, and maybe you have received your double now.
Yeah, I've had my jabs, yeah, but the problem is they don't protect you from every variant completely, do they? So you still have to be careful.
Yeah, you still have to be careful. Yeah, that's it. So we'll see how that goes, and we see what the conversation is going to be like. in Glasgow at the moment. Oh, sorry, what is going to be the outcome from there? I think the last one they had, the one of the lacunas was that there was no legal binding on the agreement. So everybody just signed it and they went back doing nothing about it at all. So if there could be some legal binding and some commitments,
Yeah.
In a way that they will support organizations and support local communities to take these actions, that will be fine. And I spoke with an activist from Bangladesh, and the situation there is far worse.
Yeah.
And then places like that need action. The same way there was this declaration, like you said, the four law things, the lockdown and everything is the situation that Bangladesh, some areas will need now to deal with the issues of sea flooding, cyclones,
Yeah.
storms, sea level rising, and all of those. So it's quite catastrophic down there to deal with.
There's some been interesting conversation as well, hasn't there, about access to the talks, which I've been following a little bit. So there's a problem with the people who are most affected, people from the global south, like Bangladesh, struggling to get to the talks for whatever reason, for the cost of travel or visa reasons. And I think there's a real inequality problem there, actually. If the people who are most affected by this issue can't get to the talks to talk to world leaders, that's just not right. So we need that to be solved as well.
It's absolutely fine, because I think that's the point you've just raised there. The most affected people should take the central stage.
Absolutely, yeah, absolutely. They should be at the front, shouldn't they? Saying, "Look, this is what's happening. This is what we're having to deal with." They should be there to talk to everybody.
As a matter of fact, they should be the people proposing some of the solutions, because if you are feeling it, you might have a time to think out the way out of it. And if you share that with some other people from different places, then they will be able to provide some level of support that they will need. I think so. That's a good point. So access will be something I think the UN generally would need to discuss with the UK government, to say we need people from certain places to come over here and let's have this conversation. And possibly, if everything works well, it's also not a bad idea to take some of these conferences to places where the impacts are, so that after the conversation, you can walk around and see what is actually going on around.
Yeah, that wouldn't be a bad idea, would it? Yeah. Although I suppose it's a big job, isn't it, to host a conference on that scale? So maybe it would be difficult to ask a country that's feeling the impacts of climate change to take on that as well.
Yeah, but it's about the support. If you need, most of these places have very good venues and nice places to host this. So if they need any support, it's a matter of, it's just like organizing a FIFA World Cup. So usually FIFA will step in with all the support to upgrade infrastructure to accommodate people coming. So this is not anywhere compared to FIFA.
Yeah, that's true. That's a good way of looking at it, actually. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so how is the administration of Leicester Friends of the Earth at the moment? Activities going on? I understand you're working with some experts from DMU and having some activities. So how is that going?
Good, yeah. Leicester Friends of the Earth. So we're not a massive group, and we've shrunk a little bit during lockdown, like most community groups, I think. But we're still very active. And this year we started by at the beginning of the year, we were campaigning particularly around peat, the use of peat. So peat bogs in the UK and in other places as well are being drained and dug up for use in horticulture. Peat bogs are actually an enormous carbon store. So if you drain them and dig them up and plant your seedlings in them in the garden, they release their carbon. So that's a big climate change problem, the use of peat like that. And it's also a big biodiversity problem as well, of course, because they're a really interesting habitat. And if we keep draining them and digging them up, we're destroying that habitat. So at the beginning of the year, we spent quite a lot of time campaigning. We were asking gardeners to take a pledge not to use peat in their gardens. And then we were also contacting schools in Leicester and asking them not to use peat-based compost in their gardening project. And then we also created a list of shops that were selling peat-free compost, so that people could check the list and then know where to buy their compost. So that was part of our campaign at the beginning of the year. And then we've also started talking to the council about their use of weed killer in parks, particularly parks and green spaces. So they use glyphosate weed killer, and that is, that's linked to all sorts of problems. It's linked to human health problems, cancer, but it's also, when we've got this crisis affecting nature as well as the climate crisis, we have this nature crisis where we've got an enormous loss of habitat and species. I'm reading a book at the moment called The Silent Earth by Dave Coulson about the decline in insect species, which is almost as terrifying as the climate crisis, to be honest. Because, if insects are sort of the first rung on the food chain, aren't they? And if we lose all of our insect species, that's going to impact us very quickly. So I just think we need to be creating more space for wildlife in our cities, and going around spraying every weed with poison is just it's not a good plan.
Yeah.
About that as well. And we've created a petition. So we've been doing some campaigning around those two things. And then we're also we're working alongside Climate Action and Transition Leicester, which are two other environmental groups in Leicester. We're working together to talk to them about what we think needs to be added to the City Council's Climate Action Plan. And then we're sort of collaborating on correspondence with the City Council about that. So we've got several projects on the go. Oh, the other thing we're doing, that's right, I almost forgot. We formed a partnership this year with the Race Equality Centre in Leicester, because we want to work with them to sort of highlight the connection between racism and climate change, which often gets forgotten. I think we've talked about that today, haven't we? About people who are least responsible being most affected. And that's in terms of countries, but it's also within countries. So in Leicester, for example, the parts of Leicester that have the worst air pollution are also the most deprived parts of Leicester, where people are least likely to own a car. And they're probably the most, I think, I've not checked the stats, they're the most diverse parts of Leicester as well. So people of colour are more likely to live there. Yeah. So there's a real inequality issue, which I think it's often not well enough understood. So we're hoping to work with the Race Equality Centre to kind of draw attention to this connection between racism and climate change. And our current project with them is we're helping to plant a garden at the community centre in Highfields, where they're based. So we've been designing that. That's one of my little jobs. That's been quite good fun, actually. I've had my graph paper out, drawing pictures of the garden and choosing plants. And we're going to start work on that in September. So it's at the moment it's just full of litter, which is not very nice. And then they've got some weeds. I'll put that in quotes because I'm going to stop using the word weeds. They've got some wild plants growing there, some thistles.
Yeah, I understand that using weeds and how anybody else will understand what it means. But that's all right. I think I understand you clearly. Somebody will understand that weeds we're talking about, those wild plants growing where they are not wanted.
Yeah. Well, it looks so. There's thistles actually, and it's interesting. We went to visit the site about a month ago now. The thistles were in flower, and there were bees all over them. And we said, "Oh no, we're going to dig these up. That's terrible." Actually, the bees are loving it. But they're very spiky plants, and people look at it and think that the area has been neglected. Which is obviously it's not so nice for people using the community centre if it looks like, especially with the litter, if it looks like a neglected area. So we are going to plant some food plants. Actually, we're going to plant some herbs. We've got 2 raised beds that we're going to install, and then we're going to plant a cherry tree and some soft fruit, raspberries and things like that, so that people who use the centre can pick some fruit on their way past. And those things will, like herbs in particular, for example, they're very good for bees anyway. They have flowers with lots of nectar. So we're creating a little community garden, which will be fun.
Yeah, that's very nice projects going up right there. That's plenty of work. Thank you so much and well done for that. Unfortunately, I'm not in Leicester yet at this point in time to contribute, but when we have conferences and events, I remember we had some conversations when I was still living in Leicester. I don't know if that is still going on, those kind of activities. It doesn't, I don't mind. I can always travel around. I'm also looking up to joining a local community where I live. We'll have this conversation tomorrow for the first time. I'm meeting them. And then they're also concerned about bees, biodiversity, climate mitigation things. So I'll be very happy to join them tomorrow for the first time. It's our business, so we need to keep doing it.
Yeah, good.
You know, not for us, but for the future that we hope will inherit the earth after us, isn't it?
Yeah.
Okay. So thank you so much for coming around and sharing your fantastic activities with us. I do hope that this will drive down to whoever will come across this and to share this with other people within your organizations when the podcast, and of course the YouTube one, will be very ready immediately after this conversation. So I'll put all of them. I think I still remember Leicester Friends of the Earth Facebook page. I shared around there so that people can see and appreciate what you are doing. So thank you so much for coming around. I really appreciate your time.
No problem. Thank you for inviting me.
All right. You have a nice day.
You too.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us. My name is Justin Udie. I am the focal person for this podcast. I am a lecturer at Nottingham Trent University, and today I'm privileged to have Hannah Wakli joining us to share her thoughts on community engagement and climate change issues and environmental activities generally. She is a member of Leicester Friends of the Earth and a member of Green Party in Leicester, and she has shared her thoughts with us and what would be the expectation of local communities from the Glasgow Climate Change Conference coming up in the UK. Thank you